Barbara Hort says something very, very important. We assume the psychic vampire to be one of us, a person with an empathic soul that resonates with other souls and wishes them well. As I said in the beginning, in our introduction, if somebody's nice, you imagine they have a conscience. If you project love and trust onto somebody else, you automatically, without a single iota of proof, imagine that you're getting it in return. We project our goodness onto other people, and that's fine if those people are good and moral. But if you project your goodness and your morality and your virtue and your standards onto a person who's basically a walking graveyard, what do you think the result is going to be? And Albert Bernstein says that we can establish two absolutely non-negotiable facts about the nature of pure evil. We know that an evil person accepts no responsibility whatsoever for their own dysfunctional anti-human actions. This means that, unlike other people, when they act in an unloving manner, they do not acknowledge it or take responsibility for the consequences of their act. Indeed, in their minds, the other person is responsible. If they feel sad or broken, it's their affair. There's no empathic resonance with the suffering of the other person, and no accountability. Indeed, the evil person imagines that it is the other person's own actions that have led to their despair and undoing. Since this is often true to a point, the evil person's retorts and abuse may go unseen. It's not so much that these vampires think they're better than other people, as that they hardly think of other people at all, unless they need something. So what have we learned through all of this process and all of these incredible insights into pathology? Well, we've learned that there's a thing called the vampire equation, basically. The vampire equation is dysfunctional parenting plus oppressive society plus the creation of an idealized image or idealized self plus this dependency on approval equal self-murder equal vampirism. We've also seen now that my definition of evil, equating it with self-murder, has a great deal of merit. And we've seen something about this incredible relationship between the good and the evil. It's been written about a lot, but we're seeing it from maybe another kind of light here, that the immoral man almost needs the moral man to exist. The good man almost, or the evil man almost depends upon the existence of his counterpart. It's a strange relationship. Now, normally we'd think in daily life, yeah, a good man's behavior and energy would repel a malicious or evil person. Well, that's true to in some circumstances. But there's another, even more perfidious reality, and that is that the evil ones, the empty ones, the self-murdered ones, are attracted to the inner beauty and bounty and innocence and what have you of a good man. And good people, good men and women, do not deserve to be treated in this malignant way by people of that nature, do they? And we've seen that an unsane society certainly contributes to pathology. Schizoid individuals will create a schizogenic society, yes, but it works the other way as well. Society contributes to all forms of derangement, emotionally and mentally. We've seen that as that society becomes more hectic, more artificial, more extrovert, that these pathologies such as anxiety, neurosis, narcissism, sociopathy, not to mention the suicide and other forms of violence and war and what have you, they're going to be on the increase as well. The two go together. We've certainly seen how little actual freedom exists in what we call infancy with most families. And we've seen that what constitutes normal development, well, genuine parental attention, rational affection, and a healthy relationship with the external world. Those are absolutely non-negotiable facts. We've seen that we as human beings seem to want to avoid not only self-knowledge, but the experience of legitimate suffering. Remember the Freud quote about replacing the suffering, that so-called suffering of the neurotic, with legitimate misery of human beings? There's something rich and real about that. We've seen how extroversion plays into this, that the self-murdered person is now entering into that customized world that's just ready and waiting to fill him with all that stimuli so he never even has to think about himself. We've seen that the medical profession is certainly interested in perpetuating sickness, or if not even manufacturing these disorders, ties in with our comments on society, doesn't it? We've seen how important it is for us to monitor our own emotions. How do we feel in the presence of other people? Do we ever actually think about that? This person's just come into the room, or this person's just talking with me, and suddenly my mood has changed. 5 minutes ago I was in a good mood, now I kind of feel different. Has something happened in that time? Yeah, well, the people passing you. We live, as I said, in a plasma of people, a constant interchange of energy. We're not to assume that other people's frequency is the same as ours. We've seen that just because you, again, it needs to be repeated, just because you extend love and trust to somebody else does not mean that they're reciprocating at all. And we've seen how our chronic need for dependency leaves us wide open, potentially wide open to evil. We've seen that we must not allow the world to give us meaning, we must do it for ourselves. Ultimately, spiritually speaking, we've got to come to the understanding that nobody has anything we need psychologically and emotionally. It's all within our own capacity, it's all within our own hands. I mean, what would happen in the world if we all understood that we don't need any other human being for what we need emotionally and psychologically? That doesn't mean you become a hermit and stop existing in the world and sharing and caring, but you don't do it to the extent where you give over your whole sense of self to other people. I don't care who they are, mother, father, teacher, priest, guru, God, or whatever. Because the thing is this, if you're inclined to do that, then look what you inherit. All forms of tyranny, I mean, we're looking here at the roots of evil, aren't we? Well, let's make it very simple. If you don't do what we're talking about and you say, nope, I'm just going to continue the way we are, aren't you endorsing all the tyrannies that exist? Aren't you actually helping plant the seeds of evil, not just of the medical leviathans or of dysfunctional parentings or psychic vampires running loose in the world and sociopaths and what have you? I've said time and time again that external reality mirrors psychic reality. The world is shaped by consciousness. Now we're seeing exactly what that means. We've seen that so-called mental or emotional disorders, as they're now called, is basically boils down to ways of seeing. It's feelings that we have about ourselves, whether they're constructive or deconstructive, healthy or unhealthy. It's all a matter of choice. We certainly learned that goodness does not exist in everyone. Conscience is not universal. And just because that evil, interior can be disguised and hidden behind a veneer of niceness, and because it's relatively effortless for evil people to disguise themselves, doesn't change that fact. Another interesting way to look at this, which again goes up to a more higher perspective, is that we encounter evil people, we encounter these kinds of challenges, partly because it's ordained. It is a journey towards selfhood. Maybe we're encountering them because there's something in them that needs to be in the proximity of people who are good. And vice versa, we need, by contrast of their nature, to know truly what selfhood and love and compassion really are, by contrast. There is some sort of weird link between the good and the evil. It's a love-hate, attraction-repulsion dynamic. From this we can determine what is sanity. Well, Nina Brown tells us that it's creativity. It's the ability to delay gratification. It's the assumption of responsibility. It's meaningful relationships. On the lack of self-love, Robert A. Johnson says that despite our ecstasy when we're in love, we spend much of our time in a deep sense of loneliness, alienation, and frustration over our inability to make genuinely loving and committed relationships. Usually we blame other people for failing us. It doesn't occur to us that perhaps it's we who need to change our unconscious attitudes, the expectations and demands we impose on our relationships and on other people. And Karen Horney says something absolutely magnificent. It is, she says, in reality, not so terribly important that people in general should like us. It may, in fact, be important only that certain persons do like us, like those whom we care for, or those with whom we have to live or work, or those on whom it is expedient we make a good impression. But apart from such individuals, it is fairly irrelevant whether we're liked. Neurotic persons, however, feel and behave as if their existence, happiness, and security depended on being liked. Carl Jung puts it this way: if things go wrong in the world, it is because something is wrong with the individual, because something is wrong with me, Therefore, if I'm sensible, I shall put myself right first. For this I need, because no outside authority no longer means anything to me, I need a knowledge of the innermost foundations of my being, in order that I may base myself firmly on the eternal facts of the human psyche. We found out that there's a big difference between shame and guilt, and a big difference between conscience and superego, between empathy and just the veneer of niceness. And we've also learned something about suffering, the nature of suffering. It's summarized by Arno Gruen, who says, in our society it is not those who suffer that are weak, but those who fear suffering. People who have made the most successful societal adjustment actually turn out to be the weak ones. To conceal this fact, the well-adjusted have for millennia been propagating the myth that sensitivity means weakness. They are the ones who perpetuate a distorted view of reality, that is, the ideology of power and domination. He says, the strength that grows out of sorrow, distress, helplessness, illness, and bitter pain has to do with the kind of transcendent experience that brings inner fortitude, which is not contingent upon external power and its constant need or reaffirmation. The suffering involved in discovering one's own self is of an entirely different nature from the suffering that opts for salvation by identifying with something outside the self. Only those who can endure their own suffering are capable of establishing themselves as a separate entity. Robert Johnson says that suffering is the inevitable path that must be trod on the way to consciousness, the inevitable price for the transformation we seek. By no means can we escape it. We who try to evade it never succeed, and we are twice unlucky, for we pay the price anyway, but miss our transformation. There is a terrible and immutable law at work. We only transform when we take our suffering consciously and voluntarily. To attempt to evade it only puts us into the karmic cycles that repeat endlessly and produce nothing. Arno Gruen, on the same matter, says that to bring such people back to what they rejected about themselves so long ago means to accompany them on a journey of self-confrontation so painful that suicide, an outbreak of psychosis, or some other dire result may ensue. And I want you to meditate on what he just said there, because it's not just the individual who's going through this. The whole of society does. Nations do. The avoidance of who we all are, done on a colossal scale, has an impact on our civilization. On a more simple note, I hope that we've discovered just to have stronger boundaries in our normal relationships. Don't put yourself up for sale to the first person that comes along. Have a statement of higher value. Don't let other people take the reins of your life. Try to discover how it is that your need and your weakness and your desires for the approval of others absolutely makes you a slave in the world. And if you are in a state of slavery, you're not going to be able to free anybody else, even if it's under the name of love. I hope we've also learned that vampiristic types, like other pathological types, are not particularly rational people. I mean, after listening to the information we provided here, you can hardly say they're logical or rational. In fact, irrationality is the cause of the problems that they're suffering. So therefore, don't expect them to act rationally. Don't be so willing to entangle and engage with irrational types and go round and round and round chasing your own tail. When you try to break free from a vampiristic type, be also very aware that the problems will amp up. They won't get less, because vampire types often know ahead of time that you're ready to make a break. They can sense your discontent and what have you. And at that time, they're ready to take out, 15, 16 more, bin bags that they had hidden away in the cover of darkness and dump them in while the going is good. So be very careful about that toxic overload. Be very aware of the fact that they're not going to do the reverse psychology on you. Take a Polaroid of your madness, take a Polaroid of your anger, show it to all their mates, put it in the album, so that when they do a runner, you're standing there going, was it me or was it them? Watch out for that. Disengage. Have your own witnesses. Prepare things. Be clever. Act rationally. Be aware of their profile, their psychology. The guilt tripping that they'll pull on you, and the blame that they put on you, and the pity partying, and the comparisons with you and other people, and so on. There's a whole slew of them we don't have time to go into here. And of course, my personal point with all of this is that under no circumstances ever forgive evil. Save your tears for the victims. I hope this makes sense. Don't send them blessings. Don't send them good feelings to those who are evil and hug them and forgive them and all this nonsense. This is what got you into the problem in the first place. This is what is recommended by a lot of different books out there. It's certainly not what I recommend. Your lovingness, your caring, your hospitality, and your humanity. Now, remember we said the projection of your own virtues onto them brought them in the door. Don't be giving them more of the same. That's not logical. Understand that they don't have any conscience. Don't expect them to change. Remember the princess and the pea? Just keep adding the mattresses. Well, it would be simpler to take away the pea, no? Well, guess not. These people live in the soundproof room of their own narcissism, of their own pleasure principle, and you are as disposable as a truck, a broken truck or a broken soldier in the hands of an infant. So don't become a fixer. It's all about soul retrieval, taking back energetically what they've taken from you. It's about self-exorcism, but that means drawing the circle of protection around yourself. As a Taoist, I've learned always that good does in fact come out of evil in many instances. Homeopaths know that the body is made of qi and energy and that it needs to be strong, and that sometimes, yeah, we have to meet people that test us. Somebody once said that you're judged, your merit, your strength, your power is often judged in the power of your adversary. So if powerful, devious, dark adversaries come into your life, look at it one way, look at it in the Zen way. What does it say about your strength and your sovereignty and your morality? As Goethe said, our friends show us what we can do. Our enemies show us what we must do. Barbara Hort reminds us of the same idea. She says, all Luciferian characters and experiences have the ability to illumine us. The word comes from lucem fera, meaning light bringer. So in adversity we grow. Do you know that the most beautiful flowers are grown by prison inmates? Creation out of destruction. It's the same with our lives. We talked in the beginning about one of the major themes of this program, which is to try and live sanely in an unsane world, a world at skyrocketing rates of depression, and people being medicated, and suicide, and even open violence like war. Well, the whole idea of being able to do that involves psychic hygiene. That's what sanity is. I've defined it before in other work. In fact, it's a curious etymological fact that the words sanity and the word sanitize seem to have similar roots. Dr. Robert Holden, the founder of the Happiness Project, says that unless you are happy with yourself, you will not be happy with who you are with. Your relationship with yourself sets the tone for every other relationship you have. Eventually, everyone must pay for your own self-hatred. And one final point is that I do foresee, I've been tracking their progress, these low success rates in so many key areas, but I do predict that in a short time, in the near future, hopefully, the medical profession, the healers of the world, are going to have to factor in this concept that we've been talking about and exposing throughout this program, vampirism, this exchange of energy, not just in the traditional one-way mode, but in both ways. Because that particular processing of dark energy through your system, that pollution, is obviously the cause of a bunch of secondary pathological syndromes, yours, or that person who's sitting in a psychiatrist's room saying, hey doc, I don't know what's wrong with me, I feel depressed, I feel lonely, I feel alienated. So in other words, there's secondary anxiety, the anxiety that is now being felt throughout the world by decent people all over the world, who are being drained and drained and drained in some hideous way by these invisible parasites whose lives seem filled with bounty and abundance and happiness and pleasure. Of course, we know it's all fake and faux and pseudo, but nevertheless, why is it that people have to suffer, the good suffer? We've got to factor this in, and I believe that that is going to happen sooner or later. Joe Slate says, in a recent survey conducted by the author of 82 healthcare professionals, including clinical psychologists, counselors, social workers, and physicians in the southeastern United States, only 8 were familiar with the term psychic vampire, and only one, a clinical psychologist, reported having treated a victim of psychic vampirism, and in that instance, the patient had already diagnosed her condition before seeking therapy. Carl Goldberg says that we're still not clear why people do the appalling things to each other and to themselves, because psychoanalysts and other clinicians have only treated the symptoms of malevolence, ignorant of its causes. Evil remains elusive, able to exert virtually the same awesome and perplexing power as it always has done. When this step is taken, when healthcare professionals factor in vampirism as here described, it is then that we will, in my opinion, see the beginning of the end of evil.